Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all keeping cool in this hot weather we're having, but thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. This is the second webinar in our series attached to our research, Living and Learning, the Future of Home According to Gen Z. Last time we had an amazing discussion on sustainability, lots of ideas, lots of things that the sector can work on. So if you didn't see that or you missed it, then do go and check it out. We've got a video of that. For those that didn't come before, this research came about just because we felt that the sector needed to speak direct to the customers about what they want from their future home. We have surveyed 2,500 young people across different cohorts of 16 to 18-year-olds, current students and graduates. And we've got a lot of data to work through, which we are doing so at the moment. As I say, we've released a mini report on sustainability. This week, we're talking about community and have just released a community mini report. And coming up in the remainder of the year, we've got reports on affordability, well-being and technology. And all of that will build up into a wonderful report at the end of the year, which we are delighted to be sharing with you all. As ever, we just wanted to say a big thank you to UPP, our research partners in this project. We couldn't have done it without them, and we really thank them for sharing our vision in bringing this research to the sector to improve our products and our services to young people. As I say, we've got so much data to share with you. We're really pleased to be able to bring you community information this week, but if you want to keep up to date with what's going on and what we're doing, please visit our website, follow us on socials, and you can keep up to date when we release new information. Before I move on to let our panel introduce themselves, a wonderful panel that we've got lined up for you today, I want to say a big thank you to Coliv, who is our partner and sponsor for the community session. So big shout out to Coliv. We really love what they do in terms of constantly driving excellence in the co-living sector and providing kind of all-important expertise to the kind of an emerging and growing sector in the co-live world. So a big thank you to them. And then I'm going to pass you over to our guests so you can find out what lovely expertise we've got for you today. Sim, shall we start with you?
Thanks, Dini. My name is Sim. I'm the Chief Exec of Student Hubs, which is a charity that works in partnership with UK universities to mainstream student social action. And a large part of that is supporting students to get engaged with their community and moving outside of the university bubble into the physical spaces that they live when they come to university.
Great, thank you. Richard.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. So I'm the director of the UPP Foundation and ESG. UPP Foundation is UPP's independent charity, which is both a grant-giving foundation as well as we do public policy and thought leadership. And in terms of community, one of the things that the foundation is best known for is sort of leading on the civic university sort of movement over the last few years around the role that universities and of course students play in their local communities in terms of economic development, cultural environment, culture and so forth.
That's great, thanks Richard. Penny?
Thanks, Dini. So hi everyone, I'm Penny Clark. I'm a co-founder and one of the directors of Conscious Co-Living, and we are a consultancy and a research body. And what we do is we help shared living businesses embed social, economic and environmental impact. And I'm a researcher by background. I have a really broad interest in different types of community, from co-living to co-housing to eco-villages. And I believe that, you know, with all these different types, there's so much that these different types can really learn from one another. So thank you for having me here today. Good to be here.
Thank you, Penny. And Kate?
Hi, everybody. Stepping in last minute for our director, who unfortunately couldn't be here today for something that happened. But I am an ambassador and involved in the tech community of Coliv. Coliv is the global co-living association that connects and power the ecosystem of co-living actually around the world. So globally, I'm also a community and partnership manager for Salto System, who, by the way, is also a partner of one of the tech partners of Coliv. And also I used to run my own co-living space in London for many years. I am very passionate about community building, involving local communities, And I did it many times also locally, and especially in London, although people many times think that in a big city like London is not possible, but it is.
That's great. Thank you, Ken. Thank you for being here today as well, last minute. And Rebecca.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca O'Hare and I'm the Assistant Director of Residence Life and the Accommodation Office at the University of Leeds. And at the University of Leeds we have about 38,000 students, of which we house in any one year 8,500 to 9,000 students, both undergraduate and postgraduate level, and also family students as well, and staff too. Our accommodation varies from beautiful Victorian houses, which are a personal favourite of mine, although not very sustainable at times, to high-rise buildings that you see getting built all around many big cities in the UK, and some more traditional style collegiate halls as well. So very, very broad range of student accommodation.
That's great. Thanks, Rebecca. And to all our guests, if you want to put a question to the panel, please use the Q&A function and we will do our best to put that to them over the course of the next hour. I'll pass over to Sarah.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. We've got some really interesting questions, so we're going to get stuck in straight away. So first of all, when we talk about community, what does it mean to you? Any of you can go on, Penny?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, interesting question because it's a big one. So you gave us a chance to approach it in whatever way we wanted. So what I wanted to do was share a couple of frameworks or ways of thinking about community that I myself have found helpful. So one way of thinking about community is thinking about it in terms of acts of sharing. So to support your community, say if you are a PBSA operator, it's good to think about what is the community sharing in and how can you manage and facilitate that sharing. So for example, they're sharing certain spaces, amenities and resources. What are those and how can you help them manage and negotiate those things they have to share? And they're also sharing experiences and they're sharing a certain life stage as well, which might consist of sharing in certain routines or sharing and learning new things together. And this opens up greater possibilities for connection between these residents. So how can you as an operator build on that? And then perhaps there's interests, beliefs and values that they may share or they may not share. And what is the potential there for increasing connection? And then the second framework that I just want to briefly mention without going on too long is one that I like to use, and it's by an academic called Arenson, who noted that there are 3 characteristics of collaborative neighbourhoods, and those are co-presence, affiliation and endeavour. Co-presence, meaning being physically with each other, affiliation, meaning having things in common, and endeavour, meaning engaging in shared work. And that can be really big or really small. It can mean arranging an event together, or it can mean sharing a meal and doing the washing up together afterwards. And so I find this framework helpful because I think that the more facets of these things a community has, the more chance there is that this will be a tight-knit community. So yeah, two ways of thinking about community that I find helpful.
Really interesting, thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Penny. I think that's really interesting when we think about students and moving physically to a university, because we tend to look at community as one homogenous thing, like a student is moving to a university, moving to a physical building, that is one community, when actually what you've shared, and I think what the experience is a student can be a part of many different communities, and that can be quite overwhelming if they are moving into these spaces for the first time, living with new people, but also academically, the geography of the city as well. You aren't part of one community, you're probably part of about 20 and you don't even realise it.
There's so many amazing things, Penny, that you've already touched on, and we haven't met before, but already I'm going to reach out to you on LinkedIn and be like, I need to talk to you more, because I'm quite excited about what you said, because a lot of what you said kind of ties in. When someone says to me, how do you build a sense of community? The quickest way I kind of talk about it is that it's a verb, it's an action word, it's not a thing that you put in a piece of paper and put it out there, it'll happen. You need to really work at that community, understand that community and poke at it and ask questions. So you kind of talked about it in that way by, it's connection, it's an act of sharing, it's sharing experiences, the physically being present. You've talked about it in the same way that I think about it, which I really love. And again, just touching on what Sim said, students, as I said, they're not an homogenous group, and sometimes we think about them in that way. So we will talk about Gen Z and go, they are this, this, and this, and they are activists, and they like this, and they care about the environment. But that's not necessarily all of Gen Z. We know it's different in comparison to millennials or baby boomers, but it's not the same thing. And I quite like as well that you're thinking about that kind of intersectionality lens and looking at the academic experience, the transition to university, who they are as an individual, and that then helps shape your community or makes a vital part. And of course, the big question we always talk about is, what role does student accommodation play in that? How can we help other people, particularly academics, understand that it has a role to play and does play a massive role in that wider student experience and general sense of community?
Richard or Kate, do you have anything to add on the kind of meaning of community?
Yeah, I think that the different communities that a student might be part of is obviously a really important point. And for me, it's essentially about that sense of belonging. You know, the fact that does a student feel a sense of belonging to their hall of residence? Do they feel a sense of belonging to their course, to their university, to the institution, to their local community, which are all, you know, interlinked but perhaps distinct communities in and of themselves? And, you know, we all know that, you know, lots of research has happened over the last couple of years that young people in particular and students have been are really affected by issues around loneliness and a sense of belonging. And it really then feeds into, you know, issues of well-being and social capital too. So, you know, there's clearly a big role for student accommodation providers, for others, in partnering with the universities effectively to sort of to grow that sense of belonging, develop relationships, and ultimately at the heart of it is friendship.
Absolutely. Kate?
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty much they've already said everything, which is really good. I really strongly agree with Richard. For me, community is also a sense of belonging. It's kind of like a feeling that in a sort of way you arrived somewhere and you can now relax and find yourself within this community, and therefore you can concentrate on doing something totally different. Right, this is why community building is very important. You need to understand who you are building it for. And exactly as you said, Rebecca, you know, we often do a mistake in a sort of way to kind of like channel a certain type of people because of certain age, because of gender, because of nationality or anything else. But actually everybody's very different. So that sense of belonging, I think it's extremely important, and friendship and that's for me is community. But every time I think about community, the first word that comes into my mind as well is belonging, because then the belonging kind of like gets like a snowball effect, and you feel more comfortable everywhere. You find friends, you know, you link to people that, you know, you feel like you're closer to, you perform better, your mental health is better, everything just gets better.
Absolutely. I think one thing that you've all really touched on is different communities, and we mustn't forget kind of the wider community for a lot of these young people. The town and gown debate is a long one, you know, where institutions sit within a city. In our research, 27% of current students said that being part of a non-student club or team made them feel connected to their city. Does that surprise you?
I was really encouraged to hear it. And I think it kind of, in a broad way, it matches what I understand of Gen Z, that this is a generation that does have this culture of social consciousness, to generalize, as Sim pointed out, which is, yeah, maybe we shouldn't generalize too much. But I do think part of that kind of culture of social consciousness lends itself to an appreciation for localism. But I'm curious as well, because having said that, university, in a way, like it kind of forms a natural bubble, which it can be hard for students to break out of. You know, spatially, maybe you're on campus and you're kind of surrounded by the university. You're in the shared experience of a course together. It takes a lot of time and a lot of hard work you have to dedicate to it. And you probably haven't got a lot of disposable income, and that can be a barrier to engaging with kind of culture outside of those four walls. So yeah, I think there's kind of external structures, which means even if that interest is there, maybe there's some help needed to help students integrate with life outside of university walls. So yeah, I'd be curious to hear from others, like how that happens, how they see that happening.
I think just to pick up on what Penny was talking about there, I think that it didn't surprise me, and I think what was really positive about the survey is also there was a really high number of Gen Z that were really keen to work or volunteer locally too, that came out strongly in the research. And clearly there are, benefits to the individual student from that, thinking about employability, graduate outcomes, social capital, and well-being around, developing that relationship approach to sort of it being embedded within the community. And then, from those activities, clearly benefits locally to bridge those town-gown divides, but also to sort of, ensure that the resources of students, and Sim will be able to talk about this, and the work that student hubs do to support the key challenges in a particular place and helping to overcome them. The issue though, and Penny sort of alluded to this, is sort of unequal access to those opportunities. So students that are able to take part in what you might call the immersive elements of a HE experience is quite unequal. So it's those from more advantaged backgrounds are able to take part in those activities, whether it and are able to therefore benefit from those activities. And there's lots of evidence to suggest, during COVID and before COVID, from the Sutton Trust, from other organisations, of that working class students are much less likely to be able to take part, whether it's in volunteering, whether it's joining clubs and societies, whether it's doing other stuff which might support their own, study abroad, whatever it is, to support their own sort of graduate outcomes and social capital. And so therefore, some universities are thinking about more progressive approaches around this. How do you embed some of this immersive activity within the curriculum, either being a co-curricular approach or even accredited via what we might call service learning, which is very popular in the States, where as part of your degree program, you might go and work in a community group, or you might go work with a local charity and get accredited for that. That something's practical, that using your learning from your degree into the local community itself. And the benefits of that is that it is all students, however they're learning, however they're living, can benefit from that approach. And I suppose, then how does this matter to the people on this call and people, student accommodation providers or others? And again, I think that's around, what is your partnership with your local institutions like? Can you utilise your spaces effectively around some of this activity? And how do you signpost your residents to being able to take part in those opportunities?
So many thoughts based off of what Richard said there. A large part of the work that Student Hubs does is about supporting students outside to break free of that university bubble, because we see the greatest impact both for students and those geographic local communities come from when they work together. So we spend a lot of time sort of partnering students up with local community groups, either formalised in schools or care homes, or through more informal approaches through kind of regular meeting groups or youth clubs, to support them to work together towards an aim. And what we've found, in particular with first year students, so those typically living in university accommodation, there are two things that prevent them from really breaking through that bubble. One is the finances, is not really understanding their local area, the geography of their local area, and kind of financially what that would mean for them to physically walk off of campus. Is there a bus they need to take? Is there a train? Is there public transport of some sort? Is there a cost to entering a youth club, for example? And also the cost of, could they be having a part-time job during that time instead? But the other part is confidence. When you transition into university, it's a big knock to everybody's confidence. And we were talking before this call started about young people moving into communal spaces, communal living, and it might be the first time they've ever done that, the first time they've lived away from home, the first time they've lived somewhere else. And actually the confidence knock when you have to learn to negotiate and compromise and do your share of the dishes, for example, takes a while for people to build up that resilience again. And I think that there's more that we could all be doing, and this is a multifaceted approach coming from housing to the university to external partners, on how do we support a young person or anybody living in communal living to feel confident in the space that they have and feel like they have ownership and they belong to that space, because that will give them that confidence to go out there again. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Rebecca, have you got anything?
I was just thinking there about your, because I'm making lots of notes while people are talking actually. When you're talking about building up resilience about, moving to university, but also like normalizing it, because I find time and time again that so many students think I'm the only person who feels that way, who's finding that difficult, trying to navigate moving to a new town or a new home, navigate the campus, understand my timetable, make friends with people or ask for what I want and what I need and be vocal about it in a way that doesn't offend somebody else or causes them not to lose friends or upset somebody or result in like disagreements. It's actually quite a normal experience, and I've been thinking a lot about how do we normalize that, how do we communicate that in a way that one, students will watch that content, whatever we create, or read it, and it will resonate with them in some way. And obviously we're utilizing the experiences of other students, but I think that's still an issue for so many people because it's hyped up as being the greatest experience of your life. And for so many, it isn't always the greatest experience of your life, or it takes a year or two to become that. I know that was my case in my first year at university. So that's something I think quite a lot about. And I'm always asking other people in the sector, like, what are you doing to encourage community? What are you doing to get this kind of key message across and help people understand that actually this is really normal and it's okay, but this is what you can do to kind of make it a bit better?
I was going to say, Kate, have you got any sort of practical experiences? Because you obviously managed run a building in London. How, and
Yes.
Talking off about how difficult London potentially in big cities can be. How did your community integrate outside of the building?
Yeah, I mean, I think my community was more millennial, I have to admit, than the Gen Z. But we also need to remember that Gen Z goes up to people that right now are about 24, 25. So some of them are also already moved out of student accommodation and uni, and they're very different. But what I find in common is that they're extremely curious. They're very, very curious, and they really want to explore. So they like to learn everything. It could be anything from like food and anything that happens around them. And they're also very very conscious, of course, of sustainability and all of that sort of thing, but also in their time. So one of the reasons why they really like to also be involved in anything that is regarding their community and everything that is around them is, of course, because it's around them, but also they know it's quicker for them, so they don't have to commute too far. Obviously, this is the example, especially a big city like London, right? So we were in the borough of Islington, so anything that would happen around that borough would be of a higher interest. How my community was getting involved, I also was quite involved in the community, and I think that is something that is really important, having a facilitator within the community that is also really involved in more things. It's always a bit of like lead by example. So instead of just asking, you have someone that is already there and it can kind of like address you in a different way. So I was involved into the volunteering for like elderly people in clothes swap. I am very much about sustainable fashion. I used to work in fashion before, so I really like this sort of events. And also I used to go and help some of the local kitchens for rough sleepers or also certain type of families. But what you said something that was very interesting before, both of you, Penny and Richard, when you were talking about how different, maybe different Gen Z that comes from different background approach things in a different way, or they are more pushed to do, or to experience something. And I think the great thing about a city like London, and I say London because I don't know the other cities around the UK, I haven't lived there and I haven't experienced that, is that there is so much fundings as well for doing something like that and for really incentivate. There's a lot of, initiative, there's a lot of free stuff. But I really think that, what really, it's very, very, very important and totally underrated is the community facilitation. Someone who's really involved and can really be empathic and understanding, where someone comes from, where they can go, and how to make them thrive the most. So like, for example, I used to send some of my members, I would come back and I would say like, you're amazing at designing landing pages and you can do them in like 15 minutes. We really need it. you know, for this project of this charity, can you help us? And in that way, they will get involved by using their skills, because sometimes people are also afraid of that. They say like, yeah, but what can I do? Like, I don't know what to do. Well, instead they have a lot of skills. And this is where I think community facilitators really play a big role into all of that.
I think what you said is so spot on, Kate, but I wonder if in the industry generally, within university accommodation, within PBSA, within build to rent, within co-living, do we have the skills, the expertise and the resource to be building these partnerships up? The other thing in our research that came out very strongly was the desire for people to want to connect with local independent restaurants and shops, kind of shunning the big chains that we're used to seeing, but building up these kind of partnerships, maybe discounts, maybe experiential events, takes a lot of time. You know, do we have the time and the experience and the resource, or is it on the too hard list?
Can I jump in straight away on this? Because I'm really passionate about this. Sorry. Yes, we do. However, do all operators have understood the importance of it? No, definitely not. I can quote another example of a co-living more than a student place, but I can quote also a student place if necessary. But there is a place in London, a co-living space is called Gravity. And Gravity has really invested heavily in doing this type of research. So they opened their first places in an area that at the very beginning people were raising their eyebrows and thinking, why, who's going to come and live there? But they built this app. So they use tech to really partner with every single bit and community and independent place in the area, that this is one of the things that attracts people the most. And they had to invest the time and resources and everything, but it paid off so much in the end, because people were just like, we love it, you know, and they were telling everybody else and they were doing something else. So yes, we have the resources, and probably we also have the ability and the capability and the skills. However, I really think the KPI maybe are not there yet. And so it's very hard to really get operators to really understand the importance of it, because it's very hard to prove on numbers.
Anyone else want to comment?
I'm kind of just smiling, and this goes back to a previous project that Jeannie will know about. We used to work together, but there was a point where we worked on a project whereby, you know, students could have a membership to something and they had access to discounts on national and local retailers. And it had some pickup in different places and some not so much, but we ended up moving away from it. And now I'm thinking, is this going to be popular again? Should I bring this into Leeds or something like that? So I'm kind of like laughing about it, because years ago we were like, let's move on. It's not working. Let's, you know, look at a different model. And now I'm kind of thinking it's really funny how things come back around again.
Absolutely. I think, you know, from kind of my experience, it is getting the right things in front of the right people at the right time, and that might need constantly reinventing. It might be, you know, the things that you have now might not be right for next year's cohort or the year after. So it is about, you know, constantly investing the time and the effort and the resource. It's not necessarily something that you tick done. You know, I've built those partnerships, so let's move on. It feels like there is a role for that kind of community facilitator, you know, all year, every year in every community.
And that's why it's really important, I think, as well, when you're building that sense of community, you do evaluate it every single year in terms of what is the demographic of that community, to use the data available to you, or if you're not using data, to start using that data to make those decisions and shape it and evolve it every year.
I wonder if there's an element of, you know, I know that in PBSA particularly, it's very sales focused, and the communities are there, but they may only stay for a year. They might stay for 3 or longer, but generally it's quite a transient population. Do you think that has an impact in this kind of resource, time and effort into building partnerships outside of the building or outside of the university?
I think potentially, Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on the operator as well, and what's, you know, in it for them, if I'm honest, and how that affects their bottom line. Or I think if there was something in place whereby they guaranteed them to fill rooms, particularly in difficult sites, they'd go ahead and try it or do it. You know, let's be honest about it. I think I've seen that. And it depends on location, depends on multiple factors. What are the type of students that go there? Is it postgrad students? Is it international students? Do they know the rooms turn every single year, in the sense that those particular students will move on to the private sector in second year or go to university halls accommodation? So I think it's really unique to the operator what their objectives are, and things like location and who lives there generally.
Just moving on to something slightly different now. So in our research and in our last lounge session about sustainability, we talked about the possibility of metering to ensure accountability for energy usage. How do you think that could impact the community? Richard, I'm going to go to you with that one, because I know you've got a particular interest in ESG.
Well, I think it's a really good question, and I think it's something that, you know, we'll monitor and develop as these things occur. And I don't have an answer in terms of your bespoke question, but I suppose at UPP what they've been doing is a behavioural approach to reduction in energy use. I know we've got a brilliant new head of energy and environment who's just come from City University over the last 18 months, working with our student experience team to develop that behavioural campaign based on sort of a science-based approach on who are the best messengers, what are the best messages around this, that is really focusing on peer-to-peer sort of activity and peer-to-peer reinforcement of reduction of energy, as well as how it integrates with the sort of academic life of the student. Because, you know, all the research suggests that the lecturers and their friends and their peers living in accommodation are those that are the most trusted sources. So they've been doing a behavioural campaign with 4 universities around that to in terms of changing behaviour within halls, and was piloted at 4 institutions and is now going to be rolled out much more widely next year at UPP2.
Right.
Wow, that's great. I would love to speak with you more about that, Richard. That sounds fascinating. I'm really interested in this topic. And in fact, it's what my PhD was based on, sort of exploring the potential for sustainability in types of shared living accommodations. So yeah, I was intrigued by this question because I think there's potential there for peer pressure to occur, for good or for bad, and I think that can have positive environmental impacts, but possibly it does place an additional pressure on relationships. And I'm going to give you a quick anecdote that I heard recently speaking with an operator. So this operator told me that the model in his co-living space was all-inclusive fee, as is typical, but the residents were clustered in flats, sort of groups of 7 or 8. If their energy use went above average energy use, which had already been determined, that flat had to pay that extra energy use. And he said what happened is it caused a bit of conflict. And some people, so one example he gave was there was one resident who really loved the nice leisurely 45-minute shower. And after the bill arrived at this flat, his flatmate said, "No, you've got to stop having these showers. We're all paying for it." So I think, as with anything, the more that you're sharing together, the more the need there is to have good communication and a set of shared expectations. So I think there's a potential for extra tension, but also a potential, because of this peer pressure, for positive environmental benefits, and also a bit of personal growth as well, in terms of doing that difficult thing of negotiating what you do together, which, yes, can have conflict, but then from conflict, if handled well, there can be really positive outcomes. So I'm all for it.
Can I extend it just beyond the sort of metering question that you've asked, Sarah? Because there's, you know, we've been talking about obviously community as the heart of this conversation, and that, you know, for people around the room, I think there's real opportunity thinking about sustainability or environmental issues more generally around what is the role of students in accommodation around their halls of residence or further afield. And we talked about how can you integrate elements of, you know, community building within a curriculum. Well, one of those things are sort of environmental projects like, you know, biodiversity schemes and so forth like that. And there could be a great way of a provider working in partnership with the university and so on to think about what spaces could we develop here to support, you know, the environment and well-being in our places. Can this be embedded in a co-curricular way, and how does this then benefit the wider community and the environment, and create that sense of relationships and belonging within that project which they're developing?
I would challenge that it goes beyond biodiversity. We run a program that supports students to develop their own sustainability initiatives, and we run this with the University of Cambridge. And a lot of those projects that these students come up with are about their college and their college life. Students need to have some sense of ownership over where they live. They have to have choices, and if they're living in an accommodation, you know, they don't get to choose who their energy provider is. If they're sharing a kettle with like 7 other people, like who bought that kettle, where does it come from? Those sustainability choices are taken away from them. So we need to find ways to engage students in sustainable initiatives where they have ownership over what that looks like for their lives. So I think biodiversity is really great, and something that a lot of institutions do a lot of. Wildlife spaces, green spaces on campus, really great for well-being. But actually giving power to students and go, okay, why don't you do a research project on the energy provider of your building, and then being able to enact that change and to work in partnership with their housing association to be able to feel like they are part of that community and they have a say in what's going on.
Rebecca, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so 2 things. One was just to follow on from Penny's point, and there are more kind of ideas and things that are happening at Leeds that might be useful for people who are watching or watching later. So we have something in our residence called a happy flat poster. It's not groundbreaking. Other universities do something simpler, but it's about getting the community to come together and agree some rules about how they will live together. It's very basic. And it can be things like we will agree to clean on this day, or this person does dishes on that day. And it's actually quite useful. And the res life wardens use it in conversation with the res life assistants to help people agree that and get some of the fundamentals in place. And it made me think, we were talking about sustainable rules or sustainable expectations, that maybe we this year go, and I quickly give marketing a call afterwards and say, let's adjust it to have an environmental section about how we will live sustainably. So that's a very simple kind of idea that was thinking in my brain. The other point was around Richard talking about getting students more involved in kind of projects, collaborating with a university. So we're actually doing this at the University of Leeds in conjunction with Unite Students. There's a project called the Wellbeing Wood, that is in the grounds of James Bailey Park, our student accommodation that we allocate students into. And it's on university land. And we are working with sustainability architects and numerous volunteer students and staff members as well. And we've been transforming this space over the last 12 months or so. And it's like, you know, it's getting special status for hedgehogs to live there and be kind of rehoused back into the wild. And it's a really amazing project that students are very actively involved in. And a large cohort of students are continuously returning on a weekly or monthly basis, such as the kind of the joy and the experience they get from it. So there are projects that happen at Leeds, and probably other universities too, in fairness, but something that we're quite proud of, actually.
That sounds great. It kind of leads to my next question, really, which is about sort of those communal spaces, really. Is that a way to integrate the outside community within universities and co-living and build to rent and PBSA spaces? We know from a sustainability point of view that a lot of energy and cost is taken with heating and lighting a lot of these spaces that aren't necessarily utilised all the time, all day, every day. So do you think there's a space in the industry for those spaces to be utilised by people outside of the community? Kate?
Can I? Yeah, can I intervene there? Yeah, I'd say definitely yes. I mean, I can speak of 2 examples. For example, we have the student hotel that is a mix of hospitality and also long-term co-living for older maybe target, but also a student place. And so there is always a mix, and it's very rare that you are in the communal area and it's not utilized and there is not people, but they also have a co-working embedded into it, which is open to anyone. So you just have to, pay your membership. but also every space that they have in the communal area. So they have like a little auditorium or like a movie room, and also another bigger meeting room can be booked by anyone external, and they actually work quite closely with the local community to make sure they will use that space. I don't know about the gym, maybe area, that one I haven't asked. And also Zoku does something very similar. So the communal areas are often open to anyone. So you can go into the bar, you can have a drink, you can go to the restaurant, you can utilize the terrace, you can decide to work from there, you can do anything else, which then brings both sides together. So it's great for the local community, it's great for the inside community, so there is always different people. It's great for the sustainability because then places are more utilized. And let's also not forget that with the help of tech, we can also, you know, always keep an eye, understanding how many, you know, people are using it, analyze the data, and then understand how to use it. There's a lot of tech now that you can integrate. It could be access control, it could be ESG device. They can understand if the place is booked, if the place is not booked, how many people there is, the temperature can go high, can drop, you know, the lighting can go low, can go high. There is so much that can be done also with the help of tech.
I'd just like to advocate for that. Earlier in this call, we were talking about town and gown divide. Rebecca, you were talking about at the beginning, some housing accommodations being like high rises in cities. And actually, I think that's where a lot of tension comes from local community members is, you know, new student housing, big high rises, you know, what's in it for me? And I think being able to open up those spaces and make that a joint place will help address some of that tension. And I think we were talking about kind of students belonging to multiple communities. It's not just about them going out into the local community, but how are you bringing the community in and making that one space and one shared environment for everybody. I think the ideas you shared there, Kay, are fantastic. I would love a co-working space. I live quite close to a university, but I have no co-working spaces. So that would have been great for me on a hot day like today.
I think town and gown relationships personally fascinate me. It's something I've been interested in years. And there's a lot that we can learn from our colleagues in North America who do it really well and who exist in huge university towns, much bigger than some of the biggest ones in the UK. And what I know from town and gown relationships, and particularly because I liaise with our own kind of off-campus officer, is you get out of them what you put in. And a lot of universities will exist in this bubble and not have that role or a town and gown kind of office or team of people to liaise with the local community. And so they're kind of this really protective space and don't make much effort to engage or understand the impact, the negative impact sometimes they're having on a local community, particularly when you've got, you know, high volumes of students concentrated in one area. It's a really fascinating area. And I was recently talking to two people who, one was Amanda, who works in the University of Leeds, and then Cooper Healy, who works at Manchester Student Homes. And they both unanimously agreed that actually, for that to work well, you need to have an office within that community. You can't operate from within the university. You need to have these satellites around the university space to be part of the community, to live in that community, to understand what it's like to be there, to see the impact and empathize, and then problem solve with that community. And that way, I think would really contribute to making that relationship feel somewhat harmonious.
It's not just about having the space, it's about inviting people in, and you can't really do that until you know who you're inviting in.
Yeah, completely.
I just want to pick up what Rebecca and Sim have talked about. Sort of 3 hours that was one of the most fascinating 3 hours in my career at UPP was when we ran some focus groups in advance of our Civic University Commission, which we ran in 2018, 2019. And the ones that I attended were a mid-sized English city. And we had a focus group, and they were split by class, these two focus groups. So we had an A, B, C1 focus group, those from sort of middle class backgrounds, and a C2, D, E focus group. The first was the sort of more working class focus group. And when we were talking about the perceptions of the universities in their local community, they weren't overly hostile, but they weren't necessarily positive either. And most of the comments were around what you might call studentification issues, so around behaviour, around the fact that, you know, all the new accommodation in the city was to serve students, all the shops in the city were to serve the student pound. You know, my interaction with students is sort of, you know, as a tram driver is, you know, behaviour on the trams and so forth and so forth. We then had the next focus group, which was the middle class, the ABC1 focus group. And they did not say one single negative thing about their local universities. The two universities in the city were the thing that made them most proud of their place. All of their interaction with their students was to do with people that were volunteering, the students that you know, the absolute pleasure to deal with, and so forth. And it was absolutely fascinating, that divide within that city around their interaction with their institutions. And it sort of builds on, and we've done some polling. We published polling last July, which is the latest that we've done with HEPI and Public First on sort of public attitudes to higher education. One of the questions we ask around is you know, engagement with your universities, essentially. And what we've found is that 1/3 of people, 34% have never visited university ever in their life, including 53% of those from DE socioeconomic groups. And a further 32% of people had not visited a university in the past 5 years. And we also see a sort of social trend to those that have the non-graduates. So, for example, those AB non-graduates are much more likely to have visited a campus than those from sort of C2DE backgrounds. And I think what that shows is that A, as a sector, broader sector, so everybody I'm involved needs to do more to sort of demonstrate our value and engage with all in society. And there is a role, you know, there could be a role here as part of that for student accommodation providers and for others to think about their spaces and think about how do we get, you know, the local community and different parts of the local community to engage with what we do and demonstrate our value.
That's really fascinating. Penny, sorry.
So yeah, I absolutely agree with what's been said, but just for the sake of balance, I think, and not that anyone here was suggesting otherwise, but I do think, you know, there needs to be a bit of sensitivity about how kind of student spaces are opened up to the public, just because, you know, imagine you walk into your living room and there's people there who you don't know. So there's a slight payoff there in terms of how secure people feel and how much they feel they can relax and be in a space which feels like home, and how much they feel they're in a public space. So I agree, like overall it is a positive thing and more things should be done, but there should be a bit of sensitivity around how might this impact the people who call this space home as well.
Absolutely.
I think that's obviously right, and you have to get the balance right, but I think in terms of the estate as a whole, there could be some really interesting work done about mixed use purposes. You know, classic example is the University of Worcester, and this obviously is an accommodation example. This is their library, but when they created this new library in Worcester for both the public and for the university and for students as a mixed use facility, which I think is a really interesting development. But that was done 10 years ago, and I don't think, and somebody might correct me, that there has been another university that's adopted that model. So, you know, there are things like that that we can do, obviously.
Our research surprised us because it said that 77% of respondents still rate studying at a desk in their room as their preferred study space. But in our focus group, quite a few stated that they felt that having their desk in their room affected their mental health, that they couldn't get away from their studies. And obviously wellbeing being high on all of our agendas. Should we as a sector be telling students that they should study, socialise and sleep in one place? Or what can we do to encourage more sort of communal living and less isolation? We've touched a little bit on sort of co-working spaces. What do you all think about the study in the bedroom thing?
I'll jump in here. I've literally just been to Milan to visit a place called Aparto, and they built, I think it's a 10 or 11 floors student accommodation, really well thought, fantastic, great, different type of accommodations as well. You can have a bigger room, a smaller one, you can have a, you know, your own studio, etc. But this is one of the first time I've seen like such a dedicated study room So they designed 2 different study rooms. So the first one is a little bit more social for people that want to study, but they're also quite happy, you know, if you have a little bit of a chit chat or if you want to study with someone else. So they have single tables with kind of like, I don't know, how do you say? So sort of like barriers. I don't like to call it barriers, but something that makes you feel like you are with a lot of other people, but you can also kind of like immerse yourself in your study. And other tables where 3 or 4 people can actually sit down and study together. So a little bit like it would be maybe in a communal study area. And then the other one, it's done of all single desks with your own space. Where you can really immerse yourself, and they really done it in a really great acoustic way as well. So if someone else does a noise, you don't feel it as much. And they really incentivize people to actually be there instead of being in their own room. And they created this space in a very calm environment, very minimalistic, no distraction whatsoever. So that actually a lot of residents are incentivized to be there because they don't feel the social is a distraction, but is an added bonus. And I think, again, with design and with really kind of like pushing and experimenting, we can create better environment for to be able to study.
There's a property in Leeds and it's owned and operated by United Students. It's called White Rose View, and we have a nominations agreement with them. So we lease about 600 beds from them. And whenever we have new starters in our team, I will include that in a tour as part of their induction, because it's a really great example of a space that when you walk around, particularly the communal areas, it feels like you're in a WeWork or one of those kind of co-working spaces, because it's been really designed in a way to facilitate student learning, to facilitate students kind of bumping into each other. There are dedicated rooms for group study. There are individual rooms for, like, if you want to kind of lock yourself away and do a bit of work and not be in your bedroom. It's got this kind of like coffee cafe vibe to it. It's a really, really fantastic space, and not one, I mean, I've seen plenty, obviously, in my years in student accommodation, but this one's got a completely different feel to it that I haven't really seen elsewhere. It's kind of similar to what Kate's talking about at Parto in Milan. But there are some amazing spaces getting built, primarily in PBSA, although I am seeing universities who are going through life cycles and refurbing their accommodation to take this into consideration in their decision making. So to answer your question, Sarah, should we encourage people to socialize and sleep and study in one room? Absolutely not. I don't think so. I think it's very unhealthy, and definitely we've seen that during COVID. You know, there was certainly at Leeds, and I'm sure it's no different than any of the university, a big spike in well-being issues and concerns and anxiety around being in your room all day long. It was a very, very lonely experience, and I'm glad we've moved away from that now.
Just like to jump in on that. Agree. Humans are contradictions. Yes, we want to not work at our desk, but would also like ownership over our own desk is not a surprise to me. But I wonder, going back to our thoughts around kind of moving to university, a lot of people would move into communal living as their first place that they've lived by themselves or in a flat with strangers or new friends, shall we say. Part of it, I think, is about giving them options and allowing people to figure out what it is they like. We've had mass amounts of students the past couple of years who haven't been able to live in student accommodation and have done their education virtually and have had to be trapped in, you know, their bedrooms at home, for example. They don't know what it is like. And actually, I think as part of a university provision, whether you are the institution or you are a partner of that institution or you are part of that educational experience, giving people as many options as possible so they can learn what they like and don't like is something that we should all be doing.
Yeah, I think some of it is probably them choosing that option because of not having other options to choose from, and that's kind of the norm. I mean, we've talked about the impact of COVID really, but I guess the knock-on effect of online learning has been empty campuses, lack of engagement with societies, and catering outlets closing down. I know that obviously universities have tried really hard to accommodate for commuters and those who prefer online learning, but has it been at the detriment of a traditional campus? And, you know, are you expecting a kind of renewed focus on the campus community this coming academic year? Rebecca, I'm going to put you on the spot.
I was just unmuting myself. So I've never experienced the University of Leeds pre-COVID because I joined November 2020, but I have worked in other universities where the campus feels really vibrant. And that is one of my favorite things about returning to a university and working in universities. It is busy, it's busier. Is it back to how it was before? People tell me it is not. It's not impacted outlets in the sense that they've closed down, or some have. It's probably adjusted times more than anything else. But yeah, certainly there is a focus to getting some sense of normality pre-COVID times, it's been referred to, back. But also the university is reimagining the ways of working and spaces. So there's been two groups I've been involved in called TWOW and FY. We love acronyms in university. So like it's future ways of working and traditional ways of working. So looking at how we use certain spaces. And that means some teams are actually going to primarily work at home. Some will be hybrid and some will actually will be there the entire time. And I think actually from course delivery, they're looking at, well, which courses should elements absolutely be in person? So obviously if you're in an art course, you should be in a studio creating work and getting feedback, constructive feedback from your peers and your lecturers about the work that you're making. So courses like that really cannot be delivered online. And there was a lot of negative feedback from students from other art schools around the country who were very upset about how courses like that were delivered during COVID. But I think the thinking is that the vast majority will be in person, with certain elements or certain modules being delivered online. So it's very much about encouraging students to come to the university and be present and have that university experience.
Richard, are you seeing kind of different things starting to emerge, kind of moving into the new academic year?
So I think that the debate around online or in person, driven by what's the media and Westminster, is very bizarre. This binary division between those two things, and what we see is students want in-person teaching and learning and activity, but they want their sort of online virtual learning to enhance that. So we ran last year a big commission called the Student Futures Commission, chaired by Mary Cook, around how essentially does the student experience change and develop as a result of COVID to serve students in terms of their future prospects and success as graduates. We ran two big surveys of students, thanks to our partners group GTI, with them on that. And the latest, the one that we ran just before our final report, was quite clear that students want their lectures and recorded. They want to ensure that they have a choice, that they could either go in person or it could be multimodal. So if they're suffering from COVID or illness or something else, that they're able to sort of engage with that learning online. And so that is going to have an impact in the future around the design of campuses, inevitably, and the way we do things around student accommodation. But I don't think it's going to, it's not going to be a hostile and a negative. It means that things are going to slightly adapt and change in the way we do things. I think the biggest issue is around engagement and around how students are engaging. At the start of this conversation, we talked about confidence, and one of the biggest sort of things to emerge from that commission is there's been a real decline of confidence for young people in terms of their teaching and learning, but also in terms of the way they are engaged and their graduate outcomes. And we saw that across our surveying and our focus groups. We heard things from students that they thought they had fake grades, and do they really truly belong to their university? We heard it, despite there being relatively buoyant graduate sort of recruitment market, that there was a real lack of confidence in being able to get a good job when they leave. And so I feel like, and we've heard even in recent weeks and months when Mary and I have been traveling and visiting universities, that engagement levels across the variety of things are not as high as they were pre-COVID. And so I suppose what is incumbent on all of us, and sort of bringing it back to what we started to talk about earlier on, is how do we rebuild that confidence? How do we rebuild that sense of community and sense of belonging? And I think that is a really fundamental going forward, and adapting however students live and learn.
I think that's a great place to stop, Richard. Thank you for summing that up. Thank you all for your thoughts. We didn't get through half of the questions that we prepared because I think we got into some really great detail around the ones that we did talk about, and hopefully some really great takeaways for our viewers. I'm going to hand back to Dini now to summarise.
Cool. Thank you guys. That was fascinating. And I think, you know, all those conversations around students not being homogenous is all coming out in our research, that we've got a wide range of broad answers. Love the ideas around kind of happy flats, talk around kind of integrating technology to help. And the thing about student choice, I think, you know, we don't often give young people the choice in these things. So I think there was a lot of takeaways from that. So thank you very much. Next time we will be talking about wellbeing, which will be on the 14th of September. Our wellbeing will be is sponsored in partner with UCAS, so please do come along to that session. You can sign up now to come and join us, and yeah, lots of more insights talking. I know we talked about wellbeing today, but I think there's lots more things we can talk about wellbeing and the actual building and how they can support wellbeing. You can find out about all our stuff on kind of our website and our socials, so please go ahead and follow us. As I said, the fall will be out at the end of the year, and after community we're having a bit of a break in August where it's summer, so we'll be back with the wellbeing report in September. Once again, big thank you to Coliv for sponsoring this session. Big thank you to UPP for being our partners in all of this research, and also want to shout out to all our other kind of pillar partners, which is Loft, UCAS and Apudus. So, you know, we're very much about bringing this insight to the sector, and we couldn't do it without all our partners. So a very big thank you. It is still raining here in Somerset. I hope you're all staying cool wherever you are. And I hope the rain's coming your way, and we will be sharing the video soon, but we look forward to seeing you soon, and have a lovely evening, afternoon. Thank you. Bye.